Hi, I'm Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Joining me today are Graham Noble, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, and Tim Donner. This is The Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On top of the Islamist violence we've seen from immigrants, President Trump has shown a light on the scale of a scheme by Somali Muslim immigrants who allegedly siphoned billions of Minnesota taxpayers' dollars from food and autism programs, sending it to Kenya and Somalia. Last week, officials reportedly told Congress some of that money landed in the hands of the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group al-Shabaab. Tim, the Minnesota Department of Human Services employees posted a long statement on X that said, in part, this is a cascade of systemic failures leading up to Tim Walz. Agency leaders appointed by Tim Walz willfully disregarded rules and laws to keep fraud reports quiet, even to the extent of threatening families of whistleblowers. What do you expect the consequences will be for Walz and his department heads? And how will this case affect Minnesota's 2026 elections, Walz's re-election campaign, especially with a Republican challenger? Kristen Robbins has made fraud prevention the focus of her campaign.
Well, I think the first effect is if Tim Walz, as he seemed to, had ambitions to run for president in 2028, I think that's effectively over. I think it's a serious question as to whether he can continue on for a third term as governor of Minnesota. That's very unusual. Most governors in Virginia, is the one state where you're limited to one term. And many states, you're limited to two terms, but not Minnesota. He intends to run again. But you know what? Every time that Tim Walz has opened his mouth, he's got himself in trouble. And I think that there's many Democrats who are still shaking their heads at the fact that he was picked to run with Kamala Harris because he became an embarrassment with embellishments and outright lies about his background and his resume. You'll recall him rooting against Tesla, where he had a public forum where he said he was celebrating because the price of Tesla stock was going down back during the big Elon Musk controversy, not even realizing that a lot of his state funds were invested in Tesla. So that was a ridiculous thing. He called, the members of ICE who were raiding communities to pluck out criminal aliens. He called them the Gestapo. So, you use language like this and you think you're going to get the left all excited. But in fact, it has had the opposite effect. I think Tim Walz is someone that most Democrats would say, please just leave and don't come back.
Wait.
Waltz out the door.
Ooh.
That was good, Andrew. Graham, do you think these indictments will strengthen Trump's position against the pushback he's received from Democrats over immigration enforcement?
Well, it almost comes back to the question you asked me in another segment on this episode about political capital. Does he gain any political capital from these multiple indictments in Minnesota? I believe the feds are saying now they've indicted almost 60 people. But I also believe that if you combine that with the number of people who've been charged at the state level in various fraud schemes, almost all stemming from pandemic era aid programs and various other kind of subsidies, the total number is, I think, close to 90 people. The overwhelming majority of them are of Somali origin. It's kind of funny because Democrats currently are saying, well, you can't paint the whole Somali community with a brush of being criminals just because some of them have been, involved in these fraudulent schemes And I feel, in my head, I think, okay, all right, now do guns. Now apply that to gun violence, please.
Right.
But because the Democrats love to generalize when it suits them, but not when it doesn't. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think this puts Trump in a great position when he's trying to go after these illegal immigrants, legal aliens in Minnesota, because he can actually say, look, you can't tell me we're just snatching people off the street whose only crime was to come here to make a better lives for themselves. I mean, these people are actually stealing up to $1 billion of taxpayers' money in Minnesota, and so you've got that. That's a much bigger crime than just the civil offense of illegally entering the country. Now you've got actual fraud and massive embezzlement and all kinds of money laundering. And then, of course, you throw in the Al-Shabaab factor,
Right.
which is a Sunni Muslim terror group based in Somalia. And now that there's a report saying that it's possible that untold amounts of money is being funneled to this group. So now you've got all of these much more, you've got these legitimate reasons so far, some very important legitimate reasons why, in fact, we should be taking a very close look at the Somali community there for what's going on. So, yeah, I think that the indictments certainly help. That many indictments certainly puts Trump in a good position. And, of course, even the Attorney General of Minnesota is actually kind of angry now, because they actually got one guy. I don't know if he was a Somali or not. He had a very kind of I want to say an Arabic name, Yusuf somebody or other. Him and his wife were actually found guilty by a jury on 6 counts of fraudulently obtaining money through a business they set up, and actually a white female progressive judge in Minnesota threw out the conviction. And so even the Minnesota Attorney General now, who is no friend of Trump's, is now very upset about that. And people and American born people in Minnesota are currently up in arms. They're saying, what on earth is going on in our state? So I think Trump's in a very good position to bring a quick answer to your question.
There's a couple of other things at play here that we should mention. The first one is that this scandal was already brewing when Tim Walz was selected to be the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris. And the media, surprise, surprise, basically brushed it over, didn't give any coverage of what we now see as a massive scandal. And so it was overlooked. I didn't even see the conservative press talking much about it. So that's one thing. And the other thing that is even more disturbing in my mind is that the whistleblowers who were outing the people who were perpetrating this fraud, they were intimidated and threatened by the Walz administration and told to remain silent or else. So, I mean, this scandal runs so deep, I still think it's possible that Tim Walz will have to resign as governor of Minnesota. And if not, he probably will be advised not to run for re-election.
The Walz administration, when addressing this issue of this massive fraud that's going on, pretty much came out and made the admission that the reason why these Somalis who set up all these businesses and then funneled all this COVID money, pretending that they were feeding children and treating autism and all this kind of stuff, and they weren't doing any of it. They were just pocketing the money and buying fancy houses and cars and stuff. And the Walz administration said, well, we think that the reason why this was allowed to go on as long as it did was because officials in Minnesota were afraid of alienating the Somali community. So it was literally, they were saying, yeah, you go on, you carry on stealing the money because we don't want to upset you.
We don't want to be seen as racist. That's exactly what it is, because Somalis are black. And Tim Walz cannot, or members of his administration can't stomach themselves the idea that you could be highly critical of a Black community and a foreign community, because that would cause a lot of problems on their side. Wait a minute, you're taking Trump's side. You're targeting these innocent Somalis who are here just to make a better life, as we've discussed.
It'd be interesting to see if anybody's charged in the administration for targeting those whistleblowers and threatening them. But I want to give Andrew a bit to respond. Andrew, how long do you think it will take the state to recover from the economic loss from this alleged large-scale fraud?
Well, probably not. I don't think it's much of an impact on Minnesota's economy. I think, because not a lot of people know this, but Minnesota's GDP, it rivals that of, Argentina and Belgium and Thailand. So $1 billion out of, economy that's only $600 billion. It's a drop in the buck. Now, there could be policy consequences. It could harm Somali businesses in the short term. But I think it's more of an indictment of just how incompetent government is. Government-run programs, especially during the pandemic, they were just rife with fraud. Bureaucrats were so incompetent; they just handed out money left, right, and center. I may perturb some people here, Dave Patterson, but my question is, and I'd be facetious here, but isn't just an extension of funding for Al Qaeda, which is now, it's an ally of the United States. We support already Al Qaeda, used to be an enemy, and now we're saying taxpayer dollars to Al Qaeda in forms of weapons and personnel and all this stuff. So perhaps just an extension. This welfare fraud was an extension of America's foreign policy. Dave can comment anytime he wants, if you like.
I do want to hear your response.
Dave wants regime change in Minnesota,
right.
I think.
Yes. Well, I think that Andrew's talking about the new Syrian president, and it was back in his formative years that he was associated with Al Qaeda. I don't think that that's the case today, and it can't be the case, quite frankly, for him to stay in office as president. But the larger issue here is something I wrote about 4 or 5 years ago, and that is what we've allowed to happen is multiculturalism. Mm-hmm. And what that means is we've allowed to have particularly ethnic groups consolidate in cantonments, where if you have an opportunity to become a ISIS proponent, well, you're among friends, and that can take place. If you're looking to have terrorist inclinations, then you're surrounded by people who are influenced that way, as opposed to having assimilation, where new immigrants are assimilated throughout the country, and these concentrations of individuals who can very easily become of a single mind are encouraged. And you have the Somalis in Minneapolis, the Arab community in Dearborn, Michigan. There's a town in Texas that attempted to get the governor to agree to having Sharia law in their town to supplant normal law enforcement. If it's possible to eliminate this inclination from immigrants coming into the United States, we should do everything to encourage assimilation and not multiculturalism.
And encourage the native population, Americans, to have more children. I talked about this in previous segments. Have to have a higher replacement level, otherwise you're going to keep depending on people from Somalia and all the people who have children, which typically be of Arab descent.
Right.
And most of them, the ones you referred to, Andrew, are basically reproducing at double the rate of Americans. So you can do the math very quickly, and you understand that what's happened in England and other places in Europe could easily become the case here, because we're at 1.8 children per couple now, which is below the 2.0 replacement rate that we need to maintain the native, population in the United States.
Dave raises a great point about multiculturalism, because when the left talks about multiculturalism, they like to pretend that means people from all different cultures coming in and becoming part of our society and making it richer and more diverse and colorful, and it's all puppies and rainbows. But actually the Western, the whole Western hemisphere, because this is Europe as well, and Canada, I'm sure, is the same, the United States, their version of multiculturalism actually is that you bring all these people in from these different cultures, but when they get into your country, they form their own communities, their own insular communities, their cantonments, as Dave put it. You know, without the assimilation, multiculturalism minus assimilation can only be destructive. If you want true multiculturalism, then you want people to assimilate and adopt the values and the traditions of the country to which they are moving. You know, but if they're not doing that, if they're keeping their own culture and their own traditions and their own values and their own religions all in their little communities, excluding the native population of the country they've moved to, then that's never a good thing for anybody.
Well, I think this puts the lie to the notion that diversity itself should be the goal of American culture, because the left tells us constantly diversity is what makes us strong. But on the right, the statement is basically unity is what makes us strong. And unity and diversity, unfortunately,
pluribus unum.
Yes, out of many one, or as Al Gore said, out of one, many. But he botched it during the 2000 campaign. But unity and diversity are unfortunately at odds with each other. And I think we've learned that exactly what Graham said, the ghettoizing of culture. You just see it naturally. People cleave to others who are like them. And, you know, you could see it just in you want to go to a lunchroom at a college or a high school, you're likely to see the black kids sitting together, the white kids sitting together, the Asian kids sitting together. That's human nature. And if we're going to be a melting pot rather than a mosaic, we have to embrace unity over diversity.
I think it's going to come down to just a full court press at educating those who are coming into the country that what you're here to find is the American dream, not the isolated Somali dream, not the isolated Afghan dream, not the isolated pick your favorite country dream, but the American dream. And that comes with some responsibilities to assimilate.
Right. Dave, I want to ask you one more question while we're on the topic of immigration. Should Trump ban immigration from war-torn countries? Do you see a relationship between war and greed, as in the Minnesota madness we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I think that as a short-term stopgap measure until things become different, I think that's a perfectly legitimate approach to not bringing in other people's problems so they can be your problems.
The federal prosecutor reportedly said the stacked schemes took his breath away, and law enforcement reportedly says they aren't even close to halfway understanding the scale of this fraud. We'll be watching to see if the bureaucrat gatekeepers and watchdogs will be held responsible for their failure to stop this fraud. Thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on all of them. As well as Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel, where you can see all of our TV productions. Stop by and see our new aggregate polling operation, The Public Square. I'm your host, Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Thank you for joining us today. Get your fix of free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com.